Hey everyone, so I really enjoyed this chapter, mainly because of the last couple pages. This might just be a me thing, but the blast from the past that we kind of got with Lucci and getting to see him in action again and seeing him run into Luffy again, I don't know, the nostalgia factor weighs extremely heavily for me, at least with that particular scenario and these two characters. So I might be a little bit biased. I think I might be rating this chapter with a lot. I think I'm coming in with a lot more excitement than the average person towards this chapter, but I will gush about the Luffy-Lucci situation at the end of this video. To start with, let's take it from the top. I just want to talk about Vegapunk really quickly because I think this is probably the most important piece that came out of this chapter, which is the fact that Vegapunk dreams of creating a sort of infinite source of energy, a sort of natural resource that can fuel everybody so that every country can have as much as they need. In theory, that would end conflict. So this is really important, really interesting, because I think this goes towards the crux of what One Piece in general is heading towards, right? I think Oda gave us a really key bit of information right here in terms of, we know that there's a sort of a new dawn that the world is heading towards, a sort of idealized vision of what the perfect world would look like. But the question is, how would that be achieved? And we've gotten some hints and bits and pieces. In Wano, Luffy suggested that his vision of an ideal world, the world that he is trying to create, is one simply where his friends have enough to eat. And this is, of course, very important in the context of the Wano arc, because so much of that was focused around the idea that there's the haves and the have-nots, people who have enough food, those who are hoarding, the sort of class system that Wano had fallen into, versus the people who were deprived of food, which is basically the vast majority of people in Wano, right? We don't have to rehash all of that. That can be for a separate video or whatever, but you guys get the general idea. So Luffy also actually kind of advocated for an idea that a sharing of resources is something that's really important to him. Now, what's interesting with the Vegapunk situation is that it's the first time that energy is really being put forward as one of the key issues that the One Piece world has been suffering from. And that's what's really curious to me, because Oda has been working in this idea of, I guess you could say, wealth inequality, or at least inequality in terms of resources, the haves and the have-nots, etc., since God knows how far back in the story, right? We can go back to Goa Kingdom, we can go back to what they were talking about heavily in Dressrosa, and obviously very recently in Wano, it was very prevalent. This idea has been worked in through many arcs throughout the story, but this is the first time that we're getting it from the energy angle, and that's a little strange to me because Oda clearly had Vegapunk in mind for such a long time and was building towards this character and this character's motivations for such a long time. So it's kind of strange that Oda is kind of presenting Vegapunk as the solution, right? Vegapunk having the drive, the vision to create this sort of open source energy that everybody can use, that's somewhat limitless, that will solve conflicts between nations in theory, right? He's kind of presenting Vegapunk as the character that will probably slot in the final piece to fixing that problem. But he's introducing Vegapunk as the solution to this problem that was never really built up in the story, right? I don't think that we were all reading One Piece thinking, man, if only everybody had enough gasoline or something like that, right? So it's interesting. I'm very curious to see where Oda goes from here. We've still got plenty of One Piece to go, so I'm interested to see how this plugs into the ideas that Oda's already been working into the story in terms of like what is the driving problems that most nations in One Piece face. And seeing kind of how energy being the solution introduced through Vegapunk and everything like that fits into the problems that Oda's already been establishing and setting up so far. So that was, I think, by far the most important bit of information that we got from this chapter, since it kind of explains, I wouldn't say this is ultimately what Vegapunk's purpose for the story is, but most likely some combination between what he's doing with Punk Records and the ability to share knowledge with people, probably some combination of that, plus the energy source situation that could potentially fix every nation's need for fighting over resources and everything like that. Those seem like the two key pieces that Vegapunk can really play a role in terms of helping create a better world, bringing about this ideal vision of the future, the dawn, etc., right? We know Luffy's role, which is basically taking down the bad guys, etc., but the logistics of fixing the world post Luffy defeating the Celestial Dragons, Im, etc., that seems to be where characters like Vegapunk will come in some sense, and of course characters like Vivi, most likely Fujitora, as I talked about in recent videos. So really big stuff there. Now, talking about the nitty-gritty of this chapter, I guess the actiony bits. I love the use of Kaku in this chapter because you can't make Lucci look bad, but you also got to establish that, look, Egghead Island is a fortress. And we got plenty of hints of this so far, that if Vegapunk really wanted to mess with the Strides, if he really wanted to mess with Intruders, they would be in a lot of trouble, right? So right off the bat, Lucci and company, they have to avoid the sea beasts, right? So they teleport right around them. They don't want to deal with that stuff. But even just situations like the holograms that are coming up, right? The force fields and everything like that they have to deal with. Vegapunk's island is really, I think, representative of just how much of a problem Vegapunk can be if he so chooses to be, because he really hasn't even busted out the big guns yet, right? Oda is making Lucci look good and competent by having Lucci take out one of Vegapunk's bodies right off the bat. Atlas, Wrath, who we already saw was a capable combatant, but at the end of the day, we haven't seen the Seraphims in action yet, right? Vegapunk has 3 Seraphims basically being deployed as we speak. And honestly, based on just what the Mihawk Seraphim, the scare that it gave Blackbeard at the very least, I don't know how CP0 really deals with just the Seraphim, let alone the Straw Hats. So, we can debate to the end of the day how strong Lucci is at this point, but I think we can all agree that it seems like one side here is extremely, extremely stacked, being the Straw Hats, the Yonko crew, plus Vegapunk with all of his crazy technology, plus his Seraphim, his copies of multiple Shichibukai that he's got, basically at, if not the same level as their original counterparts or whatever, at least at a scarily comparable level, right? With some of their own tricks and everything like that. As we saw, Jinbei has an artificial Devil Fruit. The Jinbei Seraphim has an artificial Devil Fruit that the real Jinbei doesn't even have. So, to me, it's CP0 who have essentially they're the mice that have walked into a trap. I don't see them as particularly formidable threats. I view them as particularly out of their element, if anything. And, they're not the first Cypher Pole group to have wandered into Egghead Island's waters and basically gone missing, as we've heard. Multiple CP9, Cypher Pole groups have basically met a bad fate trying to go up against Vegapunk. So, I don't know. I don't know what exactly is going to play out from that situation, but just talking very briefly, one important other development that we got out of this chapter was the fact that it is confirmed that the artificial Devil Fruits, most likely, all of the Seraphim have the same Devil Fruits as their original bodies. Seraphim like Jinbei, it seems like who don't have Devil Fruits of their own, it seems like they may have been given Devil Fruits, artificial Devil Fruits like Jinbei's Swimming Fruit. But at the same time, the Seraphim Kuma has the same Devil Fruit that functions seemingly in the same way as the original Kuma. And the scary thing to think about is that this probably isn't some sort of knockoff version of it, because we already got a good example of how Momo's fruit is exactly the same as Kaido's fruit. The only thing that makes it a failure is that Vegapunk got the color wrong, meaning that functionally, and honestly, I think that's subjective, right? Which color design you like better. So functionally speaking, the fruits are exactly the same in terms of power, as far as we know. Nothing has been made out to suggest that Momo's fruit is any less powerful or any less, dragon-like than Kaido's fruit, right? It seems as though it can do all of the same things. It's just Momonosuke himself is lacking Kaido's actual fighting ability, which means that Kuma's fruit, the Paw fruit, most likely the Seraphim Kuma, has the same level of Devil Fruit ability as the actual Kuma, which is terrifying because the Paw fruit is one of the most powerful fruits out there. Same with Hancock's fruit, same with Doflamingo's fruit, same with Crocodile's fruit. So that makes the Seraphim that much more exciting, since now we know that they don't just have to be, physical fighting monsters to, to make up for a lack of Devil Fruit, right? No, it sounds as though Hancock's Seraphim is going to have the same Devil Fruit abilities as the original Hancock. It sounds like Doflamingo's Seraphim, it's not just going to be fighting hand to hand, it's going to be using the String Fruit. Seraphim, I've gushed about them before in past videos. I still think they're one of the best ideas Oda has introduced into the endgame of the series, period. Maybe my favorite idea of his that he's introduced into the endgame running part of the series, although he's been on such a roll with the Vegapunk stuff recently. The Lulusia Kingdom Destroyer, which I'm going to assume for the moment is Uranus, things like that. But Seraphims are definitely really, really up there, and this just makes them feel that much more legitimate as really the answer to the question mark of, okay, what if the Shichibukai really did work for the world government like they were supposed to? So I love that. Don't know why CP0 is being thrown into the jaws of the lion like this just to be completely crushed, but I guess we'll see in the next couple chapters. Maybe Lucci completely surprises me. I have a lot of respect for Lucci as a character, so, I guess we'll wait and see. Last tiny bit of interesting information is that it seems that Sentomaru would side. Vegapunk trusts that Sentomaru is going to be on his side versus the world government. So I like that, because Sentomaru is a character that I thought would one day be an enemy of the Straw Hats. It sounds as though he's going to be fighting on the same side for once. interesting stuff there. Let me talk about Lucci really quick. I loved seeing Lucci break out Rokugan again, and it's so cool because it feels like, it just felt like I went in a bit of a time capsule, an ice time capsule or something like that for a moment. Just getting to read, like, it's so bizarre reading a new One Piece chapter in 2022 that feels like it's straight out of Enies Lobby, with Rob Lucci turning into his hybrid form. The design is close to as far as I can tell, it's identical. Lucci's hybrid form here looks exactly the same as it did back then. Oda didn't change anything. And the way he illustrates Lucci doing Rokugan is the same, and the kind of posing that he does with Lucci, with showing a panel that's like a close-up of his face, framed between two fists, around his face. It just felt straight out of Enies Lobby. It's just, I don't know, very, very... I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but the nostalgia factor was huge for me there. And getting to end the chapter with Lucci running into Luffy, which is something that I did not think would happen this quick. Again, I talked recently in the latest video about how the pacing seems to have picked up in One Piece at a very refreshing rate that feels just right for the point we're at in the story. Lucci running into Luffy this early is insane, because this is the heavyweight matchup, right? This is the heavyweight matchup you would expect out of the protagonist and antagonist that we have set up for this arc. Luffy and Lucci, that's the heavyweight matchup. In fact, it was the first huge heavyweight matchup we ever got in the series, in terms of a very long, drawn-out match between Luffy and the main villain of the arc. So just getting to see these two characters square off again, even if it doesn't lead to anything major, that just gave me a sort of, I don't know, it put a smile on my face, I'll say that. I really enjoyed seeing those two run into each other at the end of the chapter. And honestly, I can say that out of all of the villains in One Piece, I would say that Lucci is the one that I think is most interesting to see Luffy run into again, right? Just because Luffy's run into Crocodile post Alabasta, right? Lucci fought Crocodile, he was his main villain, etc. in that given arc, Alabasta. And we've already gotten that sort of reunion with them with Impel Down, Marineford, and everything like that, right? We've gotten to see a glimpse of what the Luffy-Crocodile dynamic looks like post-Crocodile's defeat, post-Luffy having ruined all of his plans, etc., right? So we've gotten to see that. Then other villains, I don't think that there's anyone that really stacks up to Lucci in terms of significance pre-time skip. If Luffy ran into Doflamingo tomorrow, it's not as big of a deal to me, just because Doflamingo is very recent, right? Luffy fought Doflamingo very recently. Lucci, to me, is still that one really big-time villain that Luffy took on that was a very harrowing, significant experience for Luffy, a very extreme and almost personal antagonist that he had to take down pre-time skip that Luffy has not run into in 600+ chapters, right? So I think that this is by far, I can't think of a more interesting villain at this point in the story for Luffy to run into again, because characters like Doflamingo, even Katakuri, Kaido or Big Mom, if they're still alive, whatever, these are all very recent, right? It feels like it's the same as, it's just picking up where we left off from an arc or two ago, right? Like, but with Lucci, it's just, this is Luffy's first old school knockdown, drag out boxing match that took place over, I don't know, 30 chapters or something like that. Probably exaggerating a little bit. This is Luffy's first real, like, I don't know, his first real crazy long stretched out battle, right? And I've talked about this before, but they didn't really get a final exchange of words in the way that Luffy usually does with other antagonists. So I'm really looking forward to what they have to say to each other right here. And Lucci's not a man of many words, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's some long, drawn-out conversation. But it's just fun to see this encounter happen again. I'm getting the same feeling as I had when I saw Luffy run into Crocodile at Impel Down again. So that was probably my favorite part of the chapter. Even if Vegapunk's the most interesting and important part of the chapter, Luffy running into Lucci again was by far my favorite part of the chapter. And I really look forward to seeing how this confrontation plays out next chapter. So before we finish this video, let me just shout out the community voice, which is, of course, the submissions from my top tier of patrons. So this submission is from David Sukarin, who is wondering whether when Stussy mentions that the hologram takes her back, whether she's referring to her time with Vegapunk at the lab, or whether she has some memories from the Void Sentry. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I think it's almost 99% certain that she's definitely talking about some previous experiences with Vegapunk and the lab. And what I really like about Stussy is that she's adding a level of, I guess, prior knowledge and maturity that probably surpasses even Lucci. Obviously, Lucci is probably going to be the strongest combatant in CP0, but Stussy's kind of at least at the moment, it seems like she's really the veteran who knows the most and is going to be able to give the most information on the situation, which I think is really, really valuable here, because you kind of got a good trio of Lucci being the boss and the main fighter, Kaku kind of being the dummy that gets to be used as a showcase for Egghead Island's capabilities, and Stussy's the exposition girl who basically is going to be filling us in on everything that we can expect from Vegapunk's defenses on this island. So that's all for this video, and I will talk to you all later.